So, framing generally in communications means how people process and understand new information based on what they already believe. So, we think of this in two different views. There's portrait view, which this is what I use when I want like close-ups of my dogs, but I don't want to see like the messy unfolded blankets in the background. I just want to focus on like one thing that's happening here. So I'm zooming in on an individual action, or when we're thinking about it in messaging, we're also thinking about individual responsibility. Versus when I switch to landscape, this is something I'm more likely to do when I am visiting the beach or the mountains or trying to get a picture of like a magnificent, rainbow through the storm clouds, or if there's a beautiful sunset, I want to see as much of what's happening in that picture as I can. So that's a landscape view. When we're thinking about that in terms of general messaging, when we switch to a landscape view, we're seeing more of the context of the image. We're looking at the systems, we're looking at the environments, we're looking at what our collective responsibility is. And so folks in prevention know this, that as a culture, we are very good about talking about what individuals should or should not do to prevent violence. But what this does is this puts the onus on survivors to keep themselves safe. And it ingrains in us this belief that sexual violence will be over once we catch, the one bad guy. This is the portrait view, which is also the predominant messaging view in our culture. But from the conversation that we had yesterday, we know that prevention requires changes in our communities, which is harder to materialize. It's harder to get all of that in, a small square image. And we often think of this like it's a group project. We know what individual contributors do, and that really, really matters. But how do we tell the story of the impact that happens when a collective group of people work together and how this couldn't have been achieved without any of them? And what matters is the collective impact, not necessarily an individual's impact over one another. And so, like I had said earlier, the popular frame in the US is success or failure is dependent on individual choices and individual actions. And this frame then also puts blame and responsibility on the individual themselves. It also limits what we see. Like when we think of when we're portrait, you can see my dogs. When we're landscape, you can see their destroyed toys all over the floor, right? The portrait's not telling the whole story, but the landscape view is telling the environment in which the story is happening. So I think of yesterday when Ashley described the way that we view violence prevention as a tree. There's the leaves of the tree, there's the trunk of the tree, and then there's the roots of the tree in the soil. Individualism and the portrait frame of messaging is only looking at the leaves. And when Ashley had talked about this yesterday, we had talked about how only focusing on the leaves leads us to then blame survivors for the violence that happened to them. That's how we get harmful responses to prevention, like blaming survivors for what they wore or other behaviors, because that's only what's visible to us. If we were to zoom out a little bit and have more of that landscape view instead of a portrait view, that's when we begin to see the trunk of the tree. We see the roots where the causes of violence occur. And so this portrait frame rarely takes a look into and under the soil to examine those root causes of violence, but it's just narrowly focusing on what is immediately visible. And that's why it's so important for us to, again, take that zoom out, look at the broader landscape, and help people understand that sexual violence, intimate partner violence, and the prevention of violence does not happen in a vacuum. What's the broader context, setting, systems that are allowing violence to happen or that are allowing prevention to happen? This also means that we have to reframe our messaging a little bit too. So part of expanding that frame, I wish it were as easy as a turn of the wrist, but for us, it means that, instead of focusing on individual stories, we are looking at community norms. We're looking at policies. We're looking at broader practices too. So again, this reframe of sexual assault affects us all. Prevention is a shared responsibility. That's not something to say that like everyone will be a direct victim or survivor of sexual assault, but it's saying that we all know somebody and we are all responsible members of our community. And that means prevention is part of that responsibility too.